Ethan was just an ordinary guy who loved exploring nature. He lived in a quiet town called Vista Ridge, nestled near the desert. It was the kind of place where people told stories of strange sightings, particularly in the nearby arid vale, a vast, rugged desert landscape that stretched as far as the eye could see. These stories intrigued Ethan, though he wasn't one to easily believe in the supernatural. But something about the tales of arid vale called to him. People claimed they had seen a figure roaming the desert, a creature that wasn't human but not entirely otherworldly either. One summer day, after hearing the stories one too many times, Ethan decided to investigate. It wasn't a far trip from his home to arid vale. He packed a light backpack, some snacks, water, a flashlight, and a map, and set off on his little adventure. His friends teased him, saying, "You're going to see ghosts, Ethan." He shrugged and laughed, knowing they didn't believe in the stories any more than he did. But curiosity got the better of him, and he wanted to see if there was anything more to these tales. As he arrived at Arid Vale, the afternoon sun blazed overhead, casting long shadows over the jagged rocks and dry earth. It was a place that looked like another world, so barren and lonely that it almost seemed unreal. The air was hot, dry and still, with no sound but the occasional rustle of a lizard or the cry of a hawk high above. Ethan began walking along a well-worn trail, but it wasn't long before the temptation to explore deeper into the desert took over. He veered off the path, thinking he would get a better feel for the place without the trail guiding him. As the hours passed, the scenery began to blur together. Twisted trees, jagged stones, and the never-ending horizon. Every step he took felt like it was leading him further into a maze of rock and dust. Ethan realized he was lost. His map made no sense anymore, and the landmarks he thought he recognized looked different in the fading light. He checked his water bottle, almost empty. Panic started to rise in his chest, but he tried to stay calm. He had enough daylight left to retrace his steps, or so he thought. As the sky darkened, a chill set in, and everything around him seemed to change. The once familiar desert now felt strange, as if it was alive in a way he hadn't noticed before. And then, he saw it. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. A tall, thin figure stood motionless in the distance. Ethan blinked, unsure if it was real. The figure started to move, gliding across the sand like it wasn't even touching the ground. It was too graceful to be human, too strange to be anything he had seen before. Its body was long and stretched, almost like it was made of shadows and light. Its skin blended in with the desert, shimmering with the colors of the rocks and sand. But what struck Ethan most was that it didn't seem dangerous. It moved with a quiet elegance, as if it was simply part of the desert, like the wind or the stars. Ethan froze, torn between fear and fascination. The figure seemed to beckon him, urging him to follow, and without fully understanding why, Ethan did. He followed the creature as it glided through the night, moving deeper into the desert. There was something calming about its presence, like it wasn't leading him into danger but guiding him toward something unknown. The creature led him along paths he had never seen, past rock formations that towered like ancient monuments. It never spoke, never made a sound, but its silent guidance was enough. Eventually they reached a small, hidden trail that Ethan hadn't noticed before. The creature stopped and turned toward him, its form shimmering in the pale moonlight. Though it had no face, Ethan felt like it was smiling at him, as if it had done its job. And then, just like that, the creature vanished. It dissolved into the night, leaving Ethan standing there alone. For a moment, Ethan stood still, trying to process what had just happened. He didn't feel afraid anymore, just strangely peaceful. He looked around and realized he knew where he was. The creature had led him back to safety, back to a trail that would guide him out of the desert. As he made his way home, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the creature had been something more than just a figment of his imagination. It was like the desert itself had come to life to guide him back when he needed it most. I've worked as a ranger at this national park for more than a decade, exploring only a small portion of its vast 2.2 million acres. Even with years of patrols and countless hours spent in the wild, it felt like I barely scratched the surface of what this place had to offer. Every day, I managed both routine tasks and unpredictable events in one of the most geothermally active regions on Earth. One early morning, as the first light of day touched the horizon, I set off on my usual patrol near the geothermal areas. The land here always felt alive, breathing steam from its vents and cracks. I knew this place well, or at least I thought I did. As I walked with my clipboard, the sun barely peeking through the misty air, something caught my eye. A shadowy figure seemed to move near one of the large steam vents. At first, I brushed it off as just a trick of the light, caused by the mist and the rising sun. But when I squinted for a better view, the figure stayed there. It wasn't fading away like I expected. Curiosity got the best of me. Visitors often wander off the paths, and sometimes it ends in tragedy. My instincts as a ranger kicked in, and I approached cautiously, trying to get a closer look. As I neared the figure, confusion set in. It didn't move like a person. Its shape hovered, edges blurry from the steam swirling around it. It had to be an optical illusion. The combination of shadows, light, and steam could easily play tricks on the eyes. But I couldn't ignore it. What if someone was in trouble? I had to make sure. The ground grew hotter and more unstable as I advanced, my boots sinking slightly into the earth. The figure drifted away from me, leading me deeper into the geothermal zone, where the land became more dangerous. With every step, my unease grew. The park's natural beauty hid many dangers. Every ranger knew the stories of people who underestimated this wild place and paid the price. Suddenly, the figure vanished. It didn't fade out gradually. It just disappeared. I was left standing alone in a thick mist. The air hissed with the sound of nearby steam vents and bubbling springs. I looked around and realized that I had lost sight of the path. The once familiar landscape now seemed foreign and unsettling. My heart raced, but I knew panicking wouldn't help. I needed to stay calm and retrace my steps. As I made my way back, something else caught my attention. A new fissure had opened in the ground, not far from the main path. Hidden by the steam and light, it could have easily gone unnoticed by anyone passing through. This was serious. The park needed to be informed right away. This new danger could be life-threatening, especially for visitors who ignored the signs and wandered off the trails. I marked the location, knowing I'd need to bring a team out to secure the area and put up warnings. As I stood there, my thoughts drifted back to the figure I'd seen earlier. Was it really just an illusion? Or could it have been something more? The way it seemed to lead me to the fissure made me wonder if it was a supernatural presence, maybe something connected to the park itself, warning me of the danger. Back at the station, I reported what I had found. The fissure was real. The figure, however, stayed on my mind. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was just a strange coincidence, or maybe, in some way, the park had its own way of communicating its dangers. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on that morning. It wasn't just the mystery of the shadowy figure that stuck with me. It was the deeper lesson I learned about the balance between beauty and danger in nature. I'd always known that as a ranger, it was my job to protect both the park and the people who visited it. But that day, I gained a renewed respect for how unpredictable and powerful the natural world could be. Every day, I continued my work with this fresh perspective, understanding that the park held many secrets, some we'd never fully uncover. But no matter how mysterious or strange, it was my responsibility to stay vigilant. This place, with all its wonders and risks, needed careful watching. And as one of the few tasked with guarding it, I had to always be ready for whatever it decided to reveal next. We had always been skeptical about strange stories, my friend Vic and I. After serving on the police force for over 30 years, we didn't give much credit to tall tales. Our job had taught us to look for facts, evidence, and logic. So when we heard about the Wolfman sightings near the woods close to our retirement town, we brushed them off as nothing more than local gossip. The stories were everywhere, people whispering about a tall creature, part man, part wolf, that had been seen prowling in the forest. Some said it's covered in fur, covering its body, and glowing yellow eyes that pierced through the dark. Most people stayed away from the woods after sundown, afraid of what they might see. Vic and I laughed at the idea. We had dealt with real threats in our careers, robbers, dangerous criminals, and even the occasional wild animal. But a wolfman? It seemed like nonsense. One quiet autumn afternoon, we decided to go for a hike. It was something we had been doing more often since retirement, a way to stay active and catch up on old times. Vic suggested we take a route that passed through the woods where the wolfman had been seen. We both knew it was just an excuse to poke fun at the stories, but we also knew it would make for a more interesting hike. We walked for a couple of hours, the forest peaceful around us. There was nothing unusual. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. It was that perfect kind of quiet that you only find in the woods, where the only sound is nature itself. We weren't thinking about the wolfman anymore, just enjoying the stillness. We were far from the main trail now, somewhere deeper than we usually hiked. I remember thinking how easy it would be to get lost if we weren't paying attention. But Vic and I had spent years navigating tough situations, so we didn't worry. Suddenly, something caught my eye. A movement in the distance. At first, I thought it was a deer, but something felt off. I stopped, squinting to get a better look. Vic noticed and stopped too, following my gaze. About 200 yards away, through the thick trees, we saw it. It was standing upright like a man. Its arms were long, almost too long, and its legs bent in a strange way, like those of an animal. It moved smoothly, too smoothly, like it was used to the forest. My heart started to race, but my mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing. There had to be a logical explanation. The creature stopped for a moment, its head turning slightly as if it sensed us. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, but I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was watching us. I couldn't say for sure how, but I knew. Vic was still beside me, frozen, eyes locked on the creature. We stood there in silence, staring at the thing in the woods. It didn't come closer, didn't make a sound, but it stayed still for long enough that we could get a good look at its outline. The setting sun cast strange shadows through the trees, making it hard to see clearly, but there was no mistaking its size and shape. Then, without warning, it turned and moved deeper into the forest, vanishing into the shadows. It was fast, faster than I would have thought possible for something so large. And just like that, it was gone. The forest was silent again, almost as if it had never been there. Vic and I stood there for a few moments, not saying a word, processing what we had just seen. There were no explanations, no clear answers. We hadn't seen enough to prove anything for sure, but we had seen enough to know that something was out there, something we couldn't explain. Eventually, we turned back toward the trail, walking in silence. What could we even say? We were trained to investigate, to find evidence and get to the bottom of things, but this time, there was nothing we could do. We had seen something, but we were too far away to make out any real details. We couldn't be sure of what it was, only that it wasn't anything we had ever encountered before. By the time we made it back to the car, the woods were dark. We didn't talk much on the ride home, and for days afterward, neither of us brought it up. What was there to say? We hadn't believed the stories, not until that day. Now, we weren't so sure. Maybe there was something to the old legends after all. I used to think ghost stories were just for kids and bored adults, made-up tales to make everyone jump. My younger brothers hooked on those true horror stories channels, and I'd often hear them in the background when I was trying to focus on schoolwork or read. I always brushed it off, convinced they were fake. But now I'm the one with a story to tell. A story I never expected to experience, much less believe. This all started just a few weeks after I'd finally gotten my driver's license. I'd been out to support my friends at a school concert and ended up staying out a bit too late. My curfew was technically 10, but by the time we finished at McDonald's, it was almost midnight. I felt pretty proud driving myself around, not needing my parents to pick me up. But what should have been a quick ride home turned into something completely different. After dropping off my friend, I took a wrong turn. Not a big deal, I thought. But instead of finding my way back, I ended up on this long, narrow road stretching out toward open fields. The road was empty and lined with shallow ditches and a few distant trees. I figured I'd just find a place to turn around. No big deal, right? As I drove further, I spotted a glow down the road ahead. It looked like headlights, strange, bluish ones, but I assumed it was just another car. Some people swap their lights for colors like blue or purple to look cool. It's common enough that I didn't think much of it. But then the lights got closer and closer. I started to realize these weren't typical car headlights. There were way too many of them. Instead of 2, maybe 4 lights, this vehicle seemed to have a whole line of them, about 12, all lined up and growing brighter as they approached. They were intense and dazzling, and I could feel my pulse picking up. Whoever it was, they were speeding straight toward me. Now, I was really freaking out. I didn't recognize the area, and the vehicle was coming at me fast. I began to wonder if it was some daredevil playing a joke or showing off, but as it got closer, my nerves kicked into overdrive. Those lights seemed dead set on my lane, like they were coming straight for me. I wanted to swerve off the road, but the ditch beside me made that risky. Just as I finally decided to brace myself and veer to the side, something unexpected happened. The row of lights shot upward, straight into the air. My eyes widened as I watched them soar above my car. Through the moonroof, I could see them streak past, almost as if they were scanning the ground. I sat there frozen, my car in park, trying to catch my breath. Whatever I had almost collided with wasn't a car at all. I couldn't tell what it was, just a massive dark shape with a line of glowing blue lights. The entire thing was too quick to fully process. It was just big, shadowy, and surrounded by an eerie silence. After a few seconds that felt like forever, I managed to turn my car around, but I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see those lights trailing me. But the road was dark and empty. I eventually found my way back to a familiar street and got home, still feeling a strange mix of disbelief and relief. Back in my room, I immediately turned on my laptop, searching for anything that could explain what I saw. Some people think there are secret military drones or experimental aircraft that can do tricks like that, zipping at impossible angles and speeds. I'm not sure about that theory, though. I'm no expert, but what I saw felt like nothing designed by people. It was too strange, too smooth, too fast. So here I am, telling a story I once thought was make-believe. It all sounds like something you'd see on TV, but I swear it happened. I still don't know what I saw that night, but it's made me wonder if maybe there's more to this world than we think. When we checked into the plantation Airbnb, I felt uneasy right away. This place was a grand old mansion, once abandoned and now carefully restored, they said, to its original glory. The walls were rich with dark wood, the floors creaked beneath our feet, and everything felt heavy. Outside, the gardens were overgrown, but still beautiful, like they were hiding secrets. We were told that the mansion had been abandoned for years before being bought, fixed up, and transformed into the bed and breakfast it was now. Yet, it was clear that something still lingered, like it had been left behind. In the front parlor, we saw what they called the museum. There were glass cases filled with objects, old silver spoons, tarnished jewelry, letters, and photos from another time. Dust still clung to the frames, no matter how much they polished them, and there was an odd smell, like damp wood, and something else I couldn't place. Each item felt like it held a story of its own, stories of people long gone, people who might not have left happily. The photos caught my attention the most. In black and white, the faces looked back at me, their expressions solemn, almost knowing. As I stood there, I felt like they were watching me, like they could still see me standing in the parlor of their old home. Our room was up on the second floor, in a part of the house that hadn't been fully modernized. The bed was a four-poster with heavy curtains, giving it an old, almost regal look. The walls were painted a soft green that had faded over the years, and the furniture looked as though it had stood in that room since the house was built. When we first settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't really alone. The shadows in the corners seemed darker than they should have been, and even when the lights were on, they didn't reach those corners. The air felt thick and cool, despite the warm summer night outside. That night, as we lay in bed, I felt it more than ever. The room was too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like something was holding its breath. I closed my eyes, trying to sleep, but then I heard it. A soft, dragging sound, like footsteps shuffling across the floor. I opened my eyes, half expecting to see someone standing at the foot of the bed, but there was nothing. The shadows seemed to ripple, though, like something had passed through them. Every small sound made me jump. The floorboards creaked here and there, but they sounded deliberate, as though someone was walking, moving closer. I turned to look at my partner, but they were still asleep, breathing steadily. I kept my eyes on the door, feeling as if any moment it would open on its own and someone, would step through. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I felt like I was being watched. The next day, we explored more of the house. In the hallway, we came across another set of portraits. One caught my eye. It was of a woman in a dark dress, her face stern and eyes sharp, almost glaring. Her gaze seemed to follow us as we moved, like she didn't approve of us being there. I felt a chill and looked away, but even after we left the hallway, I couldn't shake her image from my mind. It was as if she had left an imprint on me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. Later, as I sat by the window in our room, I saw something strange outside. Near the edge of the garden, where the bushes grew thick and wild, I saw a figure. It looked like a woman, her dress long and dark, blending with the shadows of the trees. She didn't move, just stood there, watching the house. I blinked, and she was gone, as if she had never been there at all. But the feeling lingered, that sense of being watched, of being seen by something that was both there and not there. As night fell again, the air grew colder. The thick silence returned, and the house felt more alive, more awake than it had during the day. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, every nerve alert, listening. The shuffling sound returned, closer this time. I felt something cold brush against my arm, even though I was under the covers, but I was too afraid to move, too afraid to look. I heard a faint whisper, too soft to make out, like someone was speaking just out of earshot. I strained to listen, but the words were gone, fading into the stillness. I closed my eyes tightly, hoping that sleep would come, but the sensation only grew stronger. It felt like someone was standing beside the bed, watching, waiting. When morning finally came, the light seemed to chase away the cold, oppressive air that had filled the room during the night. As we packed our things, I glanced back at the room, half expecting to see a shadow or figure standing there. I felt an odd mixture of relief and sadness as we left.